Which dead celebrities are treated like saints, but were truly awful people when they were alive? Ray Charles. Made children all over the place and refused to acknowledge them. Never even tried to see them. Jerry Lewis. He treated his family like crap, cut his kids out of his will, and was a real boss on set. Watch some clips on YouTube of him and his behavior. Terrible. Most likely stemming from when he and Dean Martin split from being Martin and Lewis. Everyone thought Dean would disappear and Jerry would go on to be a massive star. As it turned out, it was the complete reverse. He was a bitter person. Bing Crosby. Father of the century. Physically and mentally abusive to all his kids, alcoholic, adulterer, slimy businessman. Check it out. Frank Lloyd Wright. He is seen as a visionary in architecture, but he was a horrible person in real life. Raging narcissist, abandoned his wife and kids to run off with the wife of one of his clients, nailed down his selected furniture in a client's home because he didn't like what the client wanted, etc. It's probably come up time and again, but John Lennon was not a nice man. His son grew to despise him enough to tell Paul McCartney that he wished Paul was his father. This thread is massive, so I'll mention it again, but a friend of mine was working a charity show Julian was in, and the two of them ended up chatting during a break. Apparently he's really nice. Julian was annoyed that people kept asking him to sing his father's songs, and his rant about that just morphed in a general rant about John. My father was abusive too, and this stuff is never all that far away, and it really can just come out talking to perfect strangers like that. It's sad that people aren't aware of this crap. Coco Chanel, revered fashion icon and also Nazi sympathizer. I haven't seen Michael Landon's name come up yet. He did amazing on Little House on the Prairie, but apparently he was actually a raging alcoholic, and even his own kids made a documentary about the father I knew. This was the one I was looking for. Michael Landon played wise, kindly characters on TV, like Charles Ingalls on Little House on the Prairie and Jonathan, a literal angel in Highway to Heaven, and a lot of people seem to think he really was actually that saintly in real life. And he could be quite kind sometimes. He adopted his first wife's children and initially treated them like his own kids, even though he was barely 12 years older than the oldest boy, but he had a cruel, almost sociopathic side too. He eventually left his first wife and married someone else, which isn't that unusual in Hollywood. He adopted his second wife's daughter, and initially treated her the same as his biological kids, which he had several of. However, he then left second wife and family for a much younger woman who worked on the Little House set, and then he publicly stated that he never really loved his second wife, which absolutely broke his children's hearts. He then told his kids that if they didn't accept his new wife with open arms, he'd have nothing to do with them. He had 2 kids with his third wife and left the bulk of his estate to them and very little to any of the kids from his previous relationships. It's like Michael Landon could only love certain people at certain times. Once he moved on, he gave all his love to the new people in his life, and treated the people he supposedly once loved as if they never really mattered to him at all. I feel like Cosby is as good as dead and would have been beatified if he had died before he got caught. My mother, who was a young adult during Bing Crosby's peak, said that he was a horrible husband and father. A serial philanderer and violent. I think 2 or 3 out of his 4 sons wound up killing themselves. What a horrific legacy for a man to leave. Just looked it up. Sons Lindsay and Dennis, R.I.P. His son Gary wrote a tell-all about his abusive father. My mother. After reading the first 2 words, I thought that you were saying that your mother was a bad person and chuckled. Reading the rest of your post makes more sense. Bing Crosby. Years ago, while watching Blue Skies with him and Fred Astaire, my dad gushed over Astaire's legacy. I asked what Bing was like, and he said, besides beating his wife and kids. What a voice. Can't watch anything with him in it now. He was a monster to anyone close to him. I don't wholly buy the narrative Bing didn't care about his family, or rather wouldn't defend them for being crappy on like a lot of parents would. My grandfather actually broke Bing's son's nose on a shared dock in North Idaho in the mid to late 50s. The son had been mouthing off, being rude, telling to the two women my grandfather had been accompanying out to the lake that he didn't want poor/regular folk on his dock while he was on the lake or some rich kid crap, and the dock was shared with the Crosby private residence on Coeur d'Alene Lake in North Idaho, half public access, half private, etc. Fairly common then. As the story goes. He told the son to quit mouthing off. The son said, "Do you know who my dad is?" or something to the effect of that, continued to mouth off, and my grandfather threatened to lay him out. You can see where this is going. One thing leads to another and he punches him square in the nose and the kid bolts up to the house. He brought Bing down, smoking the entire time, to go off on my grandfather, and Bing instead asked the two girls who had been there to explain what happened, to avoid a bias, and apparently Bing looked at his son with no empathy at all and said, "Looks like you got what you had coming," and just walked back to the house. Johnny Carson. He cheated on his wives and was an all-around prick when he wasn't on camera. The most widely known example was him telling Joan Rivers that she'd never become the star of The Tonight Show. She was the permanent guest host at the time, then refusing to ever speak to her again after she got a job elsewhere. Alfred Hitchcock was really terrible. I don't know much about him besides his movies. Tell me more? Well, he'd torture his leading ladies, for one. His abuse of Tippi Hedren, the star of The Birds and Marnie, is probably the most well-known. She talked about it at the height of the #MeToo movement. Edit, removed on set because he didn't just harass them on set. Web link. I scrolled way too far to see this one. I'm still haunted by the story of him giving a stagehand a laxative and handcuffing him to a chair overnight. Edit, guess it's a lot higher up than it was when I first saw it. Jimmy Savile. Until after he died and everything came out about the bad stuff he did. The weird thing is, the accusations were coming since '63. The BBC worked effing tirelessly to protect that man, and others, from what they were doing being made public. Even in '09 Savile was talking to his biographer and the subject of Gary Glitter came up. Savile defending him. Saying that it was just videos and pictures. Gary wasn't actually hurting anyone. The recordings of the sessions never saw the light of day. Savile was the worst kept secret, yet everyone was still shocked when all it came out after his death in 2011. But the biggest issue I have is that the BBC is still a thing. How can a government organization actively protect people who rape kids and still be allowed to exist? Or worse still, continue to force the public to pay for it? Hell, the Sex Pistols even talked about it on a show before they got banned from BBC TV. Big pun. His kids and widow effing hated him. He pistol whipped his wife in front of his children and broke her face. Damn, I didn't know this at all. Yeah, Pun was a legit thug. Used to snatch DJs right off the street, throw them in the trunk and threaten them if they leaked his music. Who Kid has some crazy stories on YouTube about when he got set up and held at gunpoint. Plus the whole beef with Jay-Z and them, where Jay allegedly got hit with a champagne bottle. And that pistol whip video was brutal. Dude just clapped her and then sat down on the couch and chilled like it was nothing as his wife ran away holding her face. Definitely a bad guy. Pablo Picasso. When I was a kid I saw this movie based on his ex-wife's memoir of him, and he was a total abusive creep. Reading all these things. Is there anyone who wasn't the worst? Alan Rickman was an incredible human being. Funny because he always played buttholes. Glad to know he wasn't a real one. Mr. Rogers. Every time I see a headline like "New Details about Mr. Rogers," I always brace myself. Then it inevitably turns out to just be something lovely and wholesome. The worst thing I've ever seen about Mr. Rogers is he had a gay black man on his show to protest segregation but said they shouldn't bring up the fact that he was gay. And then of course years later he profusely apologized to him about it and said even though he was trying to pick his battles it was still wrong. The man of course entirely understood and they were still friends. Greatest flaw is he didn't try to solve all the discrimination at once. This was in like the 60s or 70s or something too, where gay rights wasn't even a thing. Edit, didn't expect this much attention. Agreed. I should have said something more like gay rights was still quit early, and defending it on a government-funded TV show would have been quite difficult. If I recall correctly, the logic he used at the time was, we can't talk about how you're gay because they'll all want you to lose your job, which, considering how insanely effing homophobic everyone was during AIDS crisis times, I can't really find that much fault with, to be honest. Poor guy would have been a pariah instantly. I can already see the headlines of the evil gays are infiltrating our children's shows to push their agendas and crap. God, I hate this effing world. Bob Ross? Bob Ross and Mr. Rogers are just too pure. Actually, a lot of people don't know this about Bob Ross, but in 1993, he was accused of being one of the most influential painters of all time. Had us in the first half, not going to lie. P.T. Barnum. All cause of The Greatest Showman skeptical. They changed so much about his story for that movie that there was almost no reason to make it about Barnum. I forget where I heard the quote, but The Greatest Showman is what you would get if P.T. Barnum made a movie about himself. The guy was a not good person in real life. The music slaps though, not going to lie. Yeah, I just want more musicals with Zac Efron, Zendaya, and Hugh Jackman now because of it. There's already a whole series of musicals with Zac Efron. Sounds like a high school thing. Alfred Hitchcock. My grandpa worked on Hitchcock's last movie as a key grip. Supposedly, just as they were about to shoot the last shot of the last scene, Hitchcock said, "I'm tired. Let's wrap. I'm going home." The entire crew tried to explain to him that this was their last day on set, and that they were scheduled to fly halfway across the country the next day. If they wrapped now, they'd have to recreate the entire set in a studio lot when they got back, costing them a lot of money just for an incredibly short film time. But Hitchcock insisted, so they wrapped, went home, and rebuilt the set from scratch. And that's ignoring the fact that Hitchcock had never gotten out of his car and had instead directed the entire thing from inside. Sounds to me like he absolutely pooped himself. I always find it so weird when people think Hitchcock was just this nice old man. My mom was a huge fan, so I watched all his movies as a kid, and I remember sitting with her on the couch watching The Birds, and she'd be like, "Yeah, he sexually harassed Tippi Hedren during this movie." She loves movies, and she was always very open about how a lot of the people involved in making them are absolute scum. Didn't U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy once kill his assistant while driving? Edit, I've got the whole story at this point, but wow. The story goes a lot darker than I ever imagined. That crap is effed up. DWI into a lake, I think. Maybe river. Swam away and left her to drown. Edit, check out Joe Scarborough's past, too. Pablo Picasso was an abusive, raging narcissist who sucked the life out of people around him. His muses were generally young women he'd domineer and destroy. But he was never called in butthole. Not in New York. Since no one mentioned them yet. Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre. In her letters, de Beauvoir mentions several romantic and sexual relationships with female students of hers. In one case, she met a 17-year-old student who she had a relationship, and later introduced her to Sartre, who also began to have sex with her. There were a few others who basically made up Sartre's personal harem, while de Beauvoir acted as the pimp, seducing teenage girls into threesomes with Sartre. Additionally, both were signatories of a petition to remove the age of consent laws in France. The petition was written by a known pedo, Gabriel Matzneff, and signed by other French intellectuals including Foucault, who himself has been accused of sodomizing boys. Frank Sinatra. My grandpa's girlfriend and her husband used to work for him, and he was a right bastard. Didn't think that he had to pay people that worked for him, treated employees bad, all the usual human stuff. Edit, my grandpa was a widower and his girlfriend was a widow. Sinatra saved my life once. His bodyguards were stomping me, and he said, "Boys, that's enough." An ex-mobster stated in an interview that the mob made Frank their bitch. Frank Lloyd Wright abandoned his wife and children to take a mistress, who was herself already married. He drove his butler insane, and the guy ended up killing Wright's mistress and her kids, burned down his studio, and committed suicide by drinking acid. Wright wasn't there at the time. Wright's response to this was to rebuild the studio exactly as it was before, supposedly to honor his mistress and their children, but it was pretty obvious to people at the time that he just wanted to protect his legacy as an architect, as many of his most famous innovations were showcased in the design. Sure enough, it became the museum to his work and is still visited today. Committed suicide by drinking acid. That has got to be one of the most metal ways to commit suicide I have ever heard. For real. I'm going to kill myself, but first, I'm going to rip out all my fingernails one by one. That'll show me. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to be the first to know about Red Rabbit Reader's new videos. If you like our videos, please like them on YouTube and share them with your friends. We welcome your comments below. Press to start another of our videos.